A colleague of mine in Minnesota had a parent come up to her and say, I'm not sure if my child is really getting what Unitarian Universalism is about. And the minister said, what? Why do you say this? And she said, well, the other day my child was out and they said that they come to our church, and this grown-up said, well, what do Unitarian Universalists believe? And my son answered, I don't really know, but I could tell you at my church, everyone loves trees. They all just love trees at my church. I think we believe in trees. And the parent was concerned, and the minister leaned back and said, I think that's as good an answer as any I've ever heard. We're a people who believe in trees, respect trees and love trees, plant them on our sacred grounds. Our seventh principle says respect for the inherent worth and dignity. Starts with respect. It just clues in. Respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. Respect for the respect for the interdependent web of life of which we are all a part, which I think if you take a moment to think about it is the most theological of all our principles. It points to greater questions, greater statements of belief. And theology, its translation means God talk, and I think there's no greater theology than talking in the form of questions, asking questions that cause us to probe more deeply. So here's a question. If we hold trees are sacred, what about the sacredness of more existence? If we hold all of existence as sacred, do we act in such ways that affirm its sacredness? What is our posture towards the holiness all around us, within each of us, and in all the plants and all the animals, and in the dirt itself, the rocks and the formations and the starry, fiery skies all around us? So I want us to think about some of the theology today and some of our language, and maybe to ask, is there more theology for us to do around this principle? But let's start with what it says. It's really this respect for the interdependent web of existence. Interdependent. To depend on one another. I depend on it, and it depends on me. Hopefully in a I-thou relationship, a kind of sacred existence, a sacred relationship. And I'll say, it doesn't always seem that sacred to me. The prevalent and dominant worldview is that existence, Earth, and humans as part of it, are a mere resource. A mere resource. What do we depend on this Earth for? Just at its most basic level, food, water, air. I'm just going to, for a moment, just take the first one of those foods. Let's start with food. And think about kind of the relational aspect of us with our earth and food. Here's a gross fact to throw at you on a Sunday morning. We use a lot of fossil fuels in the production of our food. The average American consumes 400 gallons of oil in a year in their food production. If we just shifted to one local meal a week, just one meal a week, all local, America would save over 1 million barrels of fuel each week. So it's a really good reason to go to your farmer's market and pick out some broccoli or even some local eggs or meat, to know where your food comes from and have it close, particularly in this time when not much is growing around us, not all the berries and the strawberries, the things that bring delight to the palate, though I don't mind winter squashes. But I want us to think just about the tomato. The tomato is arguably the most eaten food in America. 28% of us eat a tomato a day, either sliced on sandwiches or created into gazpacho or in the sauces, the ketchups and the soups or the tomato sauces that we love. But tomatoes are not grown in the season. I know some of us didn't manage to get ripe tomatoes by the end of the growing season anyway. But where do the tomatoes come from that we buy in the supermarket? So 95% of American-grown tomatoes come from one little place, Imilkee, Florida, which is one of the poorest communities in the United States. It's a 10-minute drive from Naples, Florida, the second richest zip code in America. The average per capita income in Imilkee is $8,900. So in that community of color, workers who pick and grow these tomatoes year-round for us to eat will line up pre-dawn because people don't want to see them getting on the buses that take them out into the fields in the morning. And there they pick for about 12 hours these bustles, these big baskets, 32 pounds of tomatoes, and they get paid 44 cents per 32 pounds picked. So if they work at a non-stopping, relentless rate, they'll earn about $50 a day. And they're not guaranteed employment every day. And so Imilkee, you might have known this, but about 15 years ago, they got a lot of exposure because they recognized that these conditions, this demand for tomatoes year-round that we are all a part of, had produced all the conditions for modern-day slavery. They'd go into debt to pay for housing or food that they didn't earn enough to afford, and that debt slavery caused brutal conditions, and they would be beaten if they tried to leave. And so finally, one of them escaped. One escaped. And people began to learn about this, and they organized, and over 1,200 people in the last 12 years or so have been freed from modern-day slavery, and yet we know that these conditions exist in other places in our country. What is the interdependent relationship that we're actually living out? And because interdependent seems true, we all are interdependent, it doesn't necessarily always seem holy to me. And so I wonder, can we think a little bit more, do some more work on this principle to have it reflect the values we want to see true? Maybe the interdependent web of existence can be one of true respect, of mutuality, of reciprocity, respect, seeing the sacredness in one another, mutuality, wanting my flourishing to be your flourishing, reciprocity, the generous give and take between parties. Game theorists will tell you that a generous tit for tat is always the best outcome. Always the best outcome, even for the one with the advantage. A generous tit for tat will do better than a winner take all, will do better with just getting that little extra edge. Reciprocity. Now, these understandings of respect, mutuality, reciprocity have also been part of human theology in earth-based, in indigenous, and ancient belief systems across the globe. How can we begin to shift our thinking to perceive that type of relationship with us and each other and us in this world? the native Hawaiian ancient chants would tell their people that they descended from the cosmos, were birthed out of it by the holy force of creation. But they weren't told that it was them alone. They believed that everything descended from this cosmic force of creation. The plants, the rocks, the metals, the seeds, the fire, everything. And let me tell you how this has produced a native Hawaiian person who holds this theology, the significant difference. So, if a native Hawaiian islander goes into a big corporate building for the first time and is trying to find their meeting and is going down this hallway and opening their doors to see if that's where their meeting is, maybe they were supposed to hit the third door instead of the second door, and they open it up and they go into like a cleaning supply closet. And there they see, the bottles of chemicals and the mops and all the things that are there, the paper supplies. The Native American person will say, "I'm so sorry for disturbing you. I'm so sorry for disturbing you." Just like you would do if you walked into a room and all the people there turned their heads because you disturbed them a little bit. And this is because they believe that Western thought thinks it's consciousness that matters. It's consciousness that gets disturbed. But there are many other ways of thinking that there is actually a spirit of life, a mutual kinship of existence that you could recognize and affirm in non-conscious existence. How can you treat everything around you like it's worthy of respect? Another point of comparison for difference, how can we perceive differently? Native American languages are perhaps unique globally in that they don't use the subject-verb-object construction. And in fact, they're not site-based at all. We're so site-based, even in the words I'm trying to say. How can we perceive differently, right? Site-based language. But Native American language is not so noun-focused. It's actually verb-focused. They believe the most important thing is the energy flowing through. They have a sound-based language. What is a thing or a person doing? So, for instance, trees are not, that's a tree. They're the standing brother. Earth is not earth. It's Mother Earth. Not because mother is a title, because mothering is what the earth does. It cares for us. It holds us. It nurtures us. It helps us grow, right? It's a verbing that we get. How can we see what people do? Rustling, centering. How can we perceive the activity even in non-sentient life? I'm going to close with one final little story, and it's from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I love this book, and it gives so much. And she tells a story about her grandfather. Her great-grandfather's family was forced at gunpoint out of Michigan. They're forced and relocated 3 times at gunpoint along the Trail of Tears until they got to Oklahoma. And on their way, all the foods that they knew had vanished, and they discovered these trees that had nuts along the way, pecans. But they had not ever seen pecans before, so they called it pecans. And from the word, which just means nut, it's not like a specific nut, it's just like generic nut. And it's from pecan that we got pecan. And they would collect them, they'd follow them along the riverbanks, and they'd plant them in their new villages, which is why many Native American homesteads in that area have at least a grove of pecan trees. And there was this time in 1885 where it was one of those years of great drought, a famine, nothing was growing, and even the streams were running dry, so they couldn't even fish, and their people were slowly starving. And her grandfather got sent out to fish, couldn't collect anything, couldn't find anything, and on his way home, tripped and stubbed his toe on these pecans seeds. They say double jacketed to really protect the seeds. And he had no way to carry this vital food supply of protein and fat, just what they needed to make it through the winter. And so he did the only thing he could. He took off his pants that were tied with twine, twined up the legs, and carried home these like forked big bag of nuts, him and his brothers. And they made it through the season that year because of these pecans. And Robin Wall Kimmerer writes this about that flourishing, this mass abundance of nuts that were dropped in 1895. And it's called, scientifically, massed fruiting. For mass fruiting to succeed in generating new forests, each tree has to make lots and lots of nuts, so many that it overwhelms the would-be seed predators. If a tree just plodded along making a few nuts every year, they'd all get eaten, and there'd be no generation of pecans to come. But given the high caloric value of nuts, the trees can't afford an outpouring each year. They have to save up for it, as a family saves for a special event. Mass fruiting trees spend years making sugar, and rather spending it little by little, they stick it under the proverbial mattress, banking calories as starch in their roots. When the account has a surplus, only then could my grandpa bring home pounds of nuts. This boom and bust cycle remains a playground hypothesis for tree physiologists and evolutionary biologists. Tree ecologists hypothesize that mass fruiting is the simple outcome of an energetic equation. Make fruit only when you could afford it. That makes sense. But trees grow and accumulate calories at different rates depending on their habitats. So like the settlers who got the fertile farmland, the fortunate pecan trees would get rich quickly and fruit often, while their shaded neighbors would struggle and only rarely have an abundance, waiting years to reproduce. If this was true, each tree would fruit on its own cycle, predictable by the size of reserves of its stored starch. But they don't. If one tree fruits, they all fruit. There are no soloists, not one tree in a grove, but the whole grove. Not one grove in the forest, but the whole forest. Every grove, all across the county, all across the state. The trees do not act as individuals, but somehow as a collective. Exactly how they do this, we don't yet know. But what we see is the power of unity. What happens to one happens to all. We could starve together or feast together. All flourishing is mutual. May it be true for us as well. Amen.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. I wish I had lights. but anyway, so that's fine. But thanks for letting me speak. The seventh principle sounds simple enough, but what does it really mean? To me, it means recognizing that we are part of the web, and the web is part of us. We can't silo ourselves off from our environment, and we shouldn't want to, because our relationship with our environment is a source of meaning for our lives. My own journey at UUCA has led me to embrace pantheism, the idea that whatever created the universe did not create it and go somewhere to manage it, but literally became the universe, which makes everything sacred and meaningful. So I should have been born in Hawaii. Let's see. So more recently, I have focused on my identity and breaking out of the individualism I was raised in, the belief that my entire identity is contained within my skin. I used to think that I am who I am, self-made, and minimally influenced by my environment. It's clear to me now that my DNA has influenced who I am, but my environment has had a much more profound influence on who I am. I am part of something greater than myself, including my family, UUCA, our local community, our country, the entire human community, and the natural world. I feel that my identity is best defined as an earthling. Notice that the seventh principle describes the interdependent web, not an interconnected one. We depend on and need each other, the earth, and indeed the whole universe for everything to work. Meaning is found in relationships, which can be with other people, other living things, our environment, or the whole universe. I enjoy astronomy and would encourage you to become familiar with the night sky and to think about images such as the Hubble telescope view of colliding galaxies. And this is a photograph from the Hubble of two galaxies 114 million light years away from us. And the distance from one end of these galaxies to the other is over 100,000 light years. This is what they looked like 114 million years ago. Andromeda, our nearest galaxy, is visible in our night sky and is 25 times the diameter of these galaxies away from us. They are all part of your universe. Experiencing the vastness, the beauty, and the reality of our universe just might make you start to feel like you're not just an earthling, but a universeling. Now, if I am part of this world, this universe, and it is part of me, then caring for it is not altruism, it is taking care of myself. Your sense of identity can and does influence your actions. But what actions does all this philosophizing lead to? It can lead you to learn about the natural world and specifically about environmental issues, not only about climate change, but also about environmental justice issues, such as the impact of inequality on people's ability to prepare for and adapt to climate change, and to take action on what you learn. Remember that action that we take together always has more impact than we can have individually. That's why participating in the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry, our Green Initiative team, and Anne Arundel Connecting Together has the potential to make change happen and to be personally meaningful. Learning and reaching out and doing is what life is all about. Please join me in our green efforts here at UUCA as we honor the seventh principle. Thank you.